Good morning, everybody. Good to see you. I'm going to lead a song this morning. It's number 753. But I'm going to turn off the mic because I like to sing this one loud. It's good to see you. My wife is teaching nursery this morning. So I like to keep track of what she's teaching. And she's got a little song that she teaches the little kids, something they can do. And it's really hilarious. It's called Pat the Bible 1, 2, 3. Any of y'all know that one? Pat the Bible 1, 2, 3. And she's got a young fella in there who is just as happy as he can be patting that Bible. So they could pat the Bible for like 10 minutes without stopping. Just pat the Bible. It sort of reminds me when I was in Jacksonville. We have a very large nursing home in Jacksonville. Members of the church run it. And they have an Alzheimer's wing, and they invite, preachers from Jacksonville to go and do devotionals. And, the folks with Alzheimer's, they have memory problems. And so every time I would go there, I would lead a few songs before we had our Bible class. And I would say, what do y'all want to sing this morning? I feel like singing. You feel like singing? Yeah, let's sing. What do you want to sing? Amazing Grace. Okay, and we'd sing Amazing Grace, and they wouldn't let you skip verses. You had to sing all 4 or 5 verses. And I said, oh, I love that song, don't you? I love that song. Okay, what else do you want to sing? Amazing Grace. Okay. They had forgotten. They just sang it, but it was good. We had a lot of fun. So, are you ready? Our song this morning is going to be 753. I hope you studied your Bible a little bit this week. We are covering Daniel chapter 6. Daniel chapter 6 is the last historical section in Daniel. And I'm filling in for Nathan over there. It's good to see you, Nathan. Good to see you, Lisa. And I really do appreciate it, Nathan. I really love to teach the Bible. Hope you feel better soon, man. Really do. I know you got a lot of things on your mind, and appreciate it. Just appreciate this opportunity. Now, I do know that you probably don't want to come back in next week because it starts the apocalyptic section of Daniel. And I don't mind because I love that part. So I'm here if you need me. If you don't need me, fine. It'll be great. Good to have you. All right. What we're going to do today is just sort of go back and just read it all the way through. And I'm sure you've covered this section in Daniel probably almost every year of your life. If you've taught Vacation Bible School, you know this by heart. But there are some salient points we need to cover in Daniel, and I'm hoping that I've got enough historical memory to remind you of what was going on in Daniel's situation. So we are going to start, and it looks like everything is a go. I've got the magic touch. All right, here we go. It pleased Darius to appoint 120 satraps to rule throughout the kingdom. Now, satraps were just administrators and mainly tax collectors, with 3 administrators over them, one of whom was Daniel. The satraps were made accountable to them so the king might not suffer loss. Now, Daniel so distinguished himself among the administrators and the satraps by his exceptional qualities that the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. At this, the administrators and the satraps tried to find grounds for charges against Daniel in his conduct in governmental affairs, but they were unable to do so. They could find no corruption in him because he was trustworthy, neither corrupt nor negligent. Finally, these men said, "We will never find any basis for charges against this man Daniel unless it has something to do with the law of his God." So the administrators and the satraps went as a group, that's very important, as a group to the king and said, "O King Darius, live forever." The royal administrators, prefects, satraps, advisors, and governors have all agreed that the king should issue an edict and enforce the decree that anyone who prays to any god or man during the next 30 days, except to you, O king, shall be thrown into the lion's den. Now, O king, issue the decree and put it in writing so that it cannot be altered, in accordance with the laws of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be repealed. So King Darius put the decree in writing. Now, when Daniel learned that the decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs room where the windows opened towards Jerusalem. 3 times a day he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to his God, just as he had done before. These men went as a group and found Daniel praying and asking God for help. So they went to the king and spoke to him about his royal decree. "Did you not publish a decree that during the next 30 days, anyone who prays to any god or man except you, O king, would be thrown into the lion's den?" The king answered, "The decree stands in accordance with the laws of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be repealed." Then they said to the king, "Daniel, who is one of the exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you, O king. To the decree you put in writing, he still prays 3 times a day." When the king heard this, he was greatly distressed. He was determined to rescue Daniel and made every effort until sundown to save him. Then the men went as a group to the king and said, "Remember, O king, that according to the law of the Medes and Persians, no decree or edict that the king issues can be changed." So the king gave the order, and they brought Daniel and threw him into the lion's den. the king said to Daniel, "May your God, whom you serve continually, rescue you." A stone was brought and placed over the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet ring and with the rings of the nobles, so that Daniel's situation might not be changed. Then the king returned to his palace and spent the night without eating and without any entertainment being brought to him, and he could not sleep. At the first light of dawn, the king got up and hurried to the lion's den. When he came near the den, he called to Daniel in anguished voice, "Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to rescue you from the lions?" Daniel answered, "O king, live forever. My God sent his angel, and he shut the mouths of the lions. They have not hurt me, because I was found innocent in his sight. Nor have you ever done anything, nor have I done anything wrong before you, O king." The king was overjoyed and gave orders to lift Daniel out of the den. And when Daniel was lifted from the den, no wound was found on him, because he had trusted in his God. At the king's command, the men who had falsely accused Daniel were brought in and thrown into the lion's den, along with their wives and children. And before they reached the floor of the den, the lions overpowered them and crushed all their bones. Then King Darius wrote to all peoples, nations, and men of every language throughout the land, "May you prosper greatly. I issue a decree that in every part of my kingdom, people must fear and reverence the God of Daniel, for he is the living God and he endures forever. His kingdom will not be destroyed, his dominion will never end. He rescues and he saves. He performs signs and wonders in the heavens and on earth. He has rescued Daniel from the power of the lions." So Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian. So we know the facts. We know quite a few things, but I wanted to point out some things about these lions. You know, we have a lot of information about the lions of Babylon. And one of my first big research projects when I was in preaching school was to describe the place of Babylon and all the archaeological evidence that we have from there. And one of the things that sort of impressed me was the fact that Babylon was situated right on the Euphrates River. Half the city was on one side, the other half of the city was on the other side. That way they would have a continuous flow of fresh water through the city. The walls were at places 150 feet thick, maybe 75 to 100 feet high, thought to be impregnable. And in Babylon, as you go in the Ishtar Gate, they had perfected the art of making porcelain and colored porcelain. You know, you make porcelain. It's a kind of very, very fine clay that is heated to a very high temperature. And then you put the glaze on, and then you reheat it, and you can make some very pretty things in there. And so they had perfected that. They had also sort of invented the use of asphalt, a kind of tar from oil. Well, you know, Iraq had a lot of that laying around, you know, a lot of oil just there. And so they were able to distill that and make asphalt, and that's how they put their walls together. But the one thing I remember the most about this, as you go in the Ishtar Gate, they had 120 glazed lions along the street as you approached the palace of the king. And what that symbolized was that the king of Babylon had the strength and power and cooperation of lions. That was the theme of the Babylonian Empire. That was their strength. And they would use that as capital punishment on those who opposed the Babylonian Empire. Now, what happened to all those lions? As a matter of fact, when archaeologists were digging in those areas, they would find these porcelain lions. They were blue, beautiful. They stole them, basically. And you can see more of these lions in London than you can in Iraq now. They only have one left in Iraq, but we've got all kinds of pictures about them. So this was the emblem, this was the mascot, this was the power of Babylon. The kingship of Babylon was the lion, okay? And so obviously they had in the court a good collection of lions in the Babylonian court. So if the king ever wanted to put capital punishment on somebody, he would use the lions to show his power, to show his authority over the people. All right? So we look at this, and Darius was the intermediary between the Babylonian Empire and the Persian Empire. Before Cyrus came along, Darius was sent to set things in order, and he was to get everything set. So when Cyrus came after his conquest, he would come back and reign as king. Darius appointed a reliable system to collect taxes to support the government. And so Daniel was brought back into this mix. Remember, Daniel was pretty much stuck over to the side as a wise man, and when the king had that dream, they called him back in, and he was made third in the kingdom. Remember when that happened? Okay, now Daniel is brought back. He's a very old man, probably in his 80s, late 80s, because he was a teenager when he was brought to Babylon. God promised that he would restore Israel back to the promised land after 70 years. Cyrus is in the way coming in to do that, and Cyrus will make a proclamation. You can read more of that in Nehemiah and Ezra. So Daniel somehow gets put in the mix as being a chief administrator. And Daniel was so, I just imagine this, so straight-laced and not to be corrupted. He lined out his satraps and made sure that they gave accurate accounting of all their provinces. The king noticed this and said, Daniel, you keep the best books. I appreciate the way you're doing. I'm considering putting you over all this. Because, why would Darius want to leave drinking his wine and having fun to go and look at accounting? How many of you like doing the 1040 every year, right? So that's like every month he'd have to go and check these people. So Daniel, you seem to be good at this. I'm going to put you in charge of that. Maybe I'm thinking about it. And when the other administrators heard about this, they said, we can't let this happen because Daniel is uncorruptible. I mean, he goes by what the reality is, and he doesn't cook the books or anything, so we've got to get rid of him. So they looked for a way to accuse him to the king, corruption-wise. Do we have some dirt on him? It's sort of like in America when somebody plans to run for president. What's the number one thing that people start doing in the other party? Look for dirt, right? And so what we usually try to do, a political party puts together somebody that they can't find dirt on very easily, or else they'll get shot in the foot before they even get started, right? So they did all their research. They couldn't find anything wrong with Daniel. And the guy was like 80-something years old. So, wow. How could you, accuse him to the king? There's nothing on him. Everybody likes him. He's an orderly guy. He takes care of business. What can we do? This is something that I think spoke highly of Daniel. We will never find any basis for charges against this man unless it has something to do with the law of his God. You see, I just don't think Daniel was one of those loud guys, preaching all the time. I think he was a quiet man. He took care of business. But everybody knew what kind of person he was. And they knew Daniel had a God. And Daniel was ready to help anybody. And people knew him that way. So we have got to find a way to accuse him that will look bad to our king. But it's got to be something relating to how he worships his God. So they developed a plan. This was a united plan. It wasn't one man's plan or three. It was the group of those accountants who took care of the kingdom that wanted to get rid of Daniel. So they concocted a plan, and they appealed to this administrator or king's vanity. All right? We've got an idea. We want you to reestablish the power of Babylon into these people. You're a new administrator, but you need to reestablish and reconnect with the people. You are the Lion of Babylon. So, why don't you come up with a law that nobody can pray to anybody but you for the next 30 days? Well, I don't even know if the king thought this was a good idea, but it sounded like it would solidify his power and reconnect with the people. Is that, Babylon is the kingly, powerful kingdom on earth. And we'll just do that. All right? So he was tricked into offering a decree that could not be repealed. Now, I've looked at information about this laws of the Medes and Persians. And the only thing I could think of, and this may sound funny to you, but what kind of writing materials did they have back then? The Hebrews did use parchment, leather, animal skin. But most of the people in this region used cuneiform and mud brick, all right? And what they would do, they would use their cuneiform, and they kept track of all kinds of things, especially the accountants. They had to keep track of who paid what and how much they were required to pay. So it was common to them. They knew what cuneiform was and how to do that. But let's say you were dictating a book to a secretary, and he was doing the cuneiform thing, and you were dictating for 3 or 4 hours. Maybe he could fill this table with cuneiform tablets. All right? Just think about that. And then they would take them and they would burn them in the fire so that they wouldn't just be made out of clay anymore. All right? So I'm thinking, what if the guy who was dictating the letter decided, hey, I need to change something? I could see James say, wait a minute. That's already been burned in the fire. We have to go through the whole process again. Are you crazy? No, it stands. Whatever you said, it stands. So I'm thinking that's what they were thinking, that once something gets put in the fire, once something that has preserved history, it cannot be repealed. It's in there. We're not going to change it. And I would get in trouble right now, but I was thinking, women were not in charge of this. Men were. It's sort of like when you're driving somewhere and you don't know where you're going, you get lost. Are you going to stop and ask for directions? Well, the ladies, sure. They want to get there. What would the men do? Well, let's just drive around a while. I'll figure out where we are. It's the same thing with the law. They didn't want to change it. They didn't want to change it. It was a weakness in their law and in their personality. So King Darius put the decree in writing. So when Daniel learned the decree had been published, now just think about that. How do you publish something that's in a cuneiform tablet to the people? Well, they had criers. You know what criers are? They would take the announcement and they would put it on another form, maybe some kind of parchment, and they would all run throughout the kingdom. You had 120 different districts, and they all ran throughout the kingdom, and at a certain time, every month or maybe every week, the crier would announce to the people what the king has firmly decided, and everybody would be informed in that way about what was up, what the new law was. All right? So when Daniel learned about this, he wasn't invited to this little meeting. I think I've got to pray about this. It's another attack on the Jews. Now, I don't know if you've done any study on anti-Semitic behavior. Jews had a lot of it. I mean, a lot of people didn't like the Jews, and it didn't just start here either. And so later on, you'll realize when we get into, I'll give you a little history of Esther. You know, there was a full-scale attempt to get rid of the Jews completely. All right? So here we have an attitude, a mindset to get rid of Daniel because of what he stood for. So Daniel decided he would pray to the God of heaven. And here's the very interesting thing. 3 times a day, he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to his God, just as he had always done before. Let me see. I'm just a baby. I'm only 64, but when they get down on my knees, it's got to be important. Because I got to get up, right? And when the Lord sees me on my knees, there's something going on. So Daniel begins to pray. Well, they had him staked out. They went as a group and found Daniel praying and asking God for help. My question is, I know it's silly, but it's the Columbo in me. How do they know that he wasn't praying for the king or to the king? Well, yeah, sir. But he was praying. How did they know that he was not praying to this new king? Daniel wouldn't pray to a man. They knew his religion. He would only pray to the God of heaven. And some have said that he's probably praying out loud. Have you ever prayed out loud by yourself? You ought to try that. You know, most of us pray silently as we go to sleep, or maybe as we eat a meal, or as we're driving down the road. Pray out loud. So the stage is set now for them to spring the trap. They're not only springing the trap on Daniel, they're springing the trap on the king, because it comes to be very, very obvious that this king knew Daniel and had a lot of confidence in Daniel. Probably Daniel was his confidant, was his chief advisor. And the king realized that he had just stepped himself into a bear trap, and now he's going to have to kill the man he really trusts. So they go and they say, King, remember what you said about that? Remember what you... And all the criers have gone out and announced in the kingdom, right? Remember that? Remember it can't be repealed? We have witnessed, eyewitness, that this Daniel, and he is an exile from Judah. Now, why would they say that if they didn't have a real predisposition against the Jews? Didn't like them. There were still a lot of Jews in the Babylonian society. O king, didn't you put that in writing? He still prays 3 times a day. So that tells me that they have observed him praying a long time before this. And I don't know. What do you think when somebody prays? You ever go into a restaurant and maybe on Sunday afternoon, and there's a family there, and you got kids running all around? I love it, watching kids run all around. You know, mama chasing them, and let's go to the bathroom, wash your hands, you know, and dad orders, and they bring the food, and then he gets everybody's attention, and they pray in the restaurant in front of people. How do you react to that? I love that. Every chance I get, if I ever catch the eyes of the dad, good job, Dad. But they didn't see Daniel like that. They saw Daniel as a threat to the way they wanted to conduct business. And so now the king hears the natural consequence of him offering that edict, and he's got to take Daniel and put him in a lion's den. He's greatly distressed. He determined to rescue Daniel. He went to his lawyers. He went to his everybody. Is there any way I can get out of this? Couldn't do it. So they reminded him, "O king, you're going to go against your own edict? Really? We've got to get rid of this evil in the kingdom. We got to get rid of Daniel. He broke your edict. He is defying the power of Babylon. He is worthy of capital punishment. We've got to show everybody that nobody goes against the Babylonian kingdom." So the king gave the order, and they brought Daniel. I'm thinking how they brought Daniel. The soldiers were probably sent. Daniel probably knew these guys. In every sense of the word, they had respected Daniel all their lives in their service to the king, because Daniel was brought in and taken out, by these officers. And I don't think Daniel was walking like this. I think Daniel was probably walking like this. And maybe one of the soldiers was helping him make that walk. Imagine what those soldiers were thinking. What in the world is going on? Why are we doing this? This guy is as harmless as a fly. They threw him into the lion's den. I don't know. Bob tried to kill me yesterday, put me on a ladder this high, and we were working on something. I don't like high things. The Lord said, "And lo, I will be with you always." And so I'm thinking, Daniel taking a fall into a lion's den, that's got to be significant, dangerous. And then, after Daniel is down in the den, the king calls out, "May your God, whom you serve continually, rescue you." This tells me that the king had shared time with Daniel talking about this God and how Daniel responded. And just as you're here thinking about this, to be honest with you, Daniel could not worship God in Babylon. I want you to think about it. The old covenant required blood sacrifice. The old covenant required the Aaron system, high priesthood, and Levitical priest to offer your sacrifices. He couldn't do that in Babylon. The only thing that Daniel had that he could do to worship God was to pray and to read the scriptures. And apparently he had some that he could read. He had God to talk to, and that was it. Just throwing that out there. So apparently this was right around sundown. A stone was brought and placed over the mouth of the den. The king sealed it with his own signet ring. Now you know about that, right? They would put a big either wax or clay thing that would show that it had been sealed and not to be opened only by the authority of the king and the other signet rings that were affixed there. And apparently the nobles were there. There were some nobles there, so that Daniel's situation might not be changed until the morning. Now, what do you think about the people who had accomplished this goal to get rid of Daniel. Don't you think they were so happy? Don't you think maybe they got together and had a big banquet or something and were celebrating the fact that they had gotten rid of Daniel and they would be able to handle their business the way they wanted to? You know, I always thought when I was a kid that all evil people did all the time was, like cartoons where they're just, I could just can't wait till I get to something bad to happen to good people. So obviously, they were in a bit better situation than Daniel was, the way the world looks at things. But guess what happens? The king was not happy. He obviously didn't turn on YouTube that night. He didn't bring his entertainment in. Could not eat, could not sleep. Woke up very early in the morning, which, I mean, if I was a king, I would probably sleep in a little. He didn't. He was up, and he wanted to go see. And he hurried to the lion's den. When he came near the den, he called out to Daniel in an anguished voice. Didn't even open the seal or open the door yet. Just yelled out, Daniel, has your God whom you serve continually been able to rescue you from the lions? Stupid. Why didn't I think that these guys had something up their sleeve when I signed that edict? And now they've taken away Daniel from me, and now I won't know if these guys are being honest with me or not. And he's an innocent guy. That would really bother me. There might have been a pause. Have you ever talked to somebody who maybe had a little hearing loss? I don't know if Daniel did or not, but he heard it clear. And he called out, oh, come on, man. Hello. He didn't say, my thing stopped. That's terrible. Hey. Advance. There we go. Daniel cried out something I think I'll never forget. O king, live forever. That was how you addressed a king. O king, live forever. God sent his angels, and he shut the mouths of the lions. So I'm thinking about this. I'm thinking, okay, Daniel's down there probably rubbing his bruised bones from being thrown into the den and finding a nice comfy place and wondering why aren't the lions attacking him. And then an angel comes through there. Wouldn't you like to see an angel? Really, I'm telling you. Wouldn't you like to see a real angel and ask him a few questions? Do you really get to see God all the time? Tell me what it's like. And then the angel goes. There was probably a passel of lions in there. He goes and he stops the mouths of the lions, and he gets to spend all night long talking to this angel. Don't you know, Daniel was just so happy. He was just so full of joy because he was able to make a connection with God through that angel. You know, sometimes we pray and pray and pray and pray and never hear God answer. Wouldn't it be great for somebody to come to you and say, you know, the Lord God has heard your prayers, and he wants you to stick around for a while. I'm going to protect you from these lions. You're doing a good job, Daniel. Keep it up. So I'm thinking that Daniel was truly very happy all night. as he was talking to that angel. Then he calls out to the king and he said, "O king, I have never done anything against you but for you all these many years." The king was overjoyed. He gave orders to lift Daniel out of the den. I'm thinking about these soldiers and, wait a minute, you want us to go in there and get Daniel out? They had to have some way to keep those lions in check while we've never had to get anybody out of the den before. How do we do this? Daniel was lifted from the den. No wound was found on him because he trusted in his God. And at the king's command, the men who had falsely accused Daniel were brought in and thrown into the lion's den along with their wives and children. Well, I've always wondered about that. And I've come to this conclusion. That was the king's decision, not God's. That was the king's decision to punish Daniel's accusers, not God's. Before they reached the floor of the den, the lions overpowered them and crushed all their bones. Can you get in your mind what that looked like? You throw people in a den, all the cries. The lions were so packed in there, and they were actually jumping and biting and tearing apart these poor people before they even touched the floor of the den. Wow.
Is that 119 old, do you think? Because there's 120 to begin with.
Could be. I don't know. There was a lot of them, but there was enough lions around there waiting for their next meal that once you got thrown in there, you didn't touch the ground until you were torn to pieces. Sort of like piranhas. You know how piranhas? Just. So, what's so interesting about this, and now, yikes, we're done with our time. Where'd the time go? King Darius sent another missive to all the different provinces, and he talked about the faith of Daniel. And to be honest with you, I love archaeology. I wish we could find that in archaeology. But I know it happened because it's in this book. And I've got to go. See you next week.